Our first introduction to King Herod in the Bible occurs shortly after the birth of Jesus Christ, as chronicled in Matthew chapter 2. However, this was not the same Herod Antipas we read about later in the ministry of Jesus Christ. Instead, the Herod governing Palestine on behalf of Rome at the time of Christ's birth in Bethlehem was Herod the Great, son of Herod Antipater and father of Herod Antipas. Herod the Great ruled from 37 BC to 4 BC. In 37 BC, Antipater's eldest son succeeded his father and was given control over Galilee before establishing himself as the ruler of the entire region. As a leader, Antipater's son was a ruthless warrior, skilled negotiator, and tactical politician. Rome nonetheless respected him for his ability to subdue local opposition and maintain order amongst the Jews. However, the son of Antipater was most famous for his lavish and expensive building projects, the ruins of which still exist in parts of Israel today. He even led the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. For this reason, Antipater's son earned the name Herod the Great. Despite his success, Herod the Great was terrified of potential uprisings, political opposition, and threats to his rule. Whether it was dealing with the hostile Jewish zealots or ambitious members of his own family, Herod worked to preserve his political power by any means necessary. Not only did he have his wife killed, he later murdered 2 of his sons for asking too many questions about their mother. In the Gospels, we read that Herod the Great ordered the slaughter of newborn babies after learning from the Magi that the Messiah had been born to Israel, Matthew 2. This was an attempt to prevent any legitimate Jewish heir from rising and reclaiming the throne of David. However, we know from the Gospels that Herod's attempt to destroy the Messiah ultimately failed as the Holy Spirit aided Mary and Joseph in their escape from Bethlehem. Their family would remain in Egypt until the death of Herod the Great, and an angel of the Lord told them it was safe to return. After the death of Herod the Great, the order of succession was hotly contested amongst his surviving family members. As a result, the region he once governed was divided among his sons. Herod Archelaus was given regional control over Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, promising he'd eventually be ruler over his father's entire territory if he governed well. Philip II was made a tetrarch over the northern regions of Palestine, beyond Galilee. Antipas was in charge of Galilee and Perea, where Mary and Joseph would eventually settle with their family. As the tetrarch of Galilee, Herod Antipas would become a prominent player in the ministries of John the Baptist and later Jesus. In 3 of the 4 Gospel accounts, we read that Herod Antipas was the one who arrested and imprisoned John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus, after he publicly condemned Herod's unlawful, adulterous, and incestuous marriage to Herodias, the wife of his half-brother Philip I. Not only was Antipas himself already married to a daughter of the Nabatean king, his new bride was also married to Philip, Antipas' brother. Furthermore, Herodias was the daughter of Aristobulus, another of Herod the Great's sons. Therefore, in marrying Philip, Herodias had essentially married her father's brother and left that husband to marry his brother, adding another thread to the complex, incestuous web the Herodians had spun. Although it seems Antipas had some respect for John the Baptist, John's public condemnation of his open adultery publicly exposed his sin. In response, Antipas had John arrested and imprisoned, perhaps hoping that by silencing and removing John, the stain of his affair would be hidden in the dungeons and be forgotten entirely. Unfortunately, John's condemnation of Antipas' actions offended more than Herod. As it turns out, being publicly reprimanded had also drawn Herodias' ire. She looked to strike at John the Baptist. She just needed the right opportunity. At Antipas' birthday celebration, she found one. In the Gospels, we read that Salome, the daughter of Herodias and Philip, would dance for Antipas for his birthday. Her dancing had pleased Antipas so much that Herod vowed to give Salome whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, Salome then asked her new stepfather to bring her the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The Bible tells us that this request grieved Antipas, who did not want to have John killed. However, he had given his word to the girl in public and Indy, not wanting to disappoint his new wife or lose face with his guests. Herod ordered John to be beheaded and his head brought to Salome, who gave it to her mother. After the death of John the Baptist, Herod became aware of the growing popularity and influence of Jesus of Nazareth, fearing that John the Baptist had returned from the dead to haunt him for his wicked deeds. The execution of John did not sit well with Herod, who was guilt-ridden for years for killing the beloved teacher and prophet. At one point, a group of Pharisees warned Jesus that Herod wanted to have him killed as well. However, Jesus would also warn his disciples to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod, who had allied themselves against him. In any case, Jesus was fully aware of the corruption, deceitfulness, and immorality of Herod Antipas, who he referred to as that fox. When Jesus was arrested, the Roman governor Pontius Pilate sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, the regional tetrarch of Galilee. Here, Antipas came face to face with the one he had heard so much about. He even asked Jesus to give him a sign to prove he was the Messiah. Jesus, however, remained silent in the face of his accusers. Like Pilate, Herod found no charge against Jesus that warranted death. Nevertheless, he and his soldiers mocked and beat Jesus before sending him back to Pilate, who eventually had him crucified. Before Jesus' crucifixion, Herod and Pilate were considered political rivals and enemies. Afterward, the Bible tells us they became friends and allies. Antipas would experience his own political troubles in the following years, brought on by his incestuous marriage to Herodias. Aretas, the Nabatean king whose daughter Antipas had previously married, but later dumped for Herodias, returned to avenge his daughter. In the ensuing conflict, Antipas' troops were swiftly defeated, and as a result, Antipas was removed from power and banished by the Romans for his incompetence. After the banishment of Herod Antipas at the hands of the Roman emperor, Antipas' son, Agrippa I, was placed in charge of his father's territory, which he ruled from AD 37 to AD 44. Unlike his father, however, Agrippa I remained on Rome's good side for most of his tenure. In fact, after the death of the Roman Emperor Caligula, Agrippa was instrumental in helping Claudius rise to power. The Roman emperor added Judea and Samaria to Agrippa's territory for his loyalty. In time, Agrippa would come to govern an area as large as his grandfather, Herod the Great. The only mention of Herod Agrippa in the New Testament is found in the book of Acts. Here, we read that Herod sought to win the favor of the Pharisees and Jewish subjects in Jerusalem by moving against the early church and its leaders. Most scholars believe that Herod Agrippa had James, one of the original 12 disciples of Jesus and the brother of John, killed, making James the first of the 12 to be martyred. Luke then writes that when he, Herod, saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter as well. However, an angel of the Lord would miraculously deliver Peter from prison later that evening. Despite his attempt to curry favor with the Jewish leaders, Herod Agrippa would further establish himself as an enemy of God. In the same chapter of Acts, Agrippa appeared before the people in a pompous fashion. When the people praised Agrippa as a god, Luke writes that immediately an angel of the Lord struck him, Herod, because he did not give God the glory, and he eaten by worms and died. Agrippa would eventually be replaced by his son, Agrippa II, who is also mentioned in the book of Acts during Paul's imprisonment in Caesarea. Here, Herod was eager to hear Paul's defense, even going so far as to confess, "In a short time you will persuade me to become a Christian." However, Agrippa had limited political jurisdiction, so he had no choice but to honor Paul's request to appeal his case to Rome. Years later, Agrippa II was caught in the middle of a Jewish revolt that preceded the eventual destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. With Agrippa II's death, the Herodian dynasty, their power, influence, and rule over the Jews officially ended.